Hello and welcome to Media Lit, where we treat each piece of media like great literature. I'm your host, Randy Elaine, and joining me, as always, is the wonderful Kris Ingersoll, rocking yet another great hairstyle. How you doing, Kris?
So good, buddy. I wasn't sure how I would answer the question, and then you hit me with that compliment, and so, I'm so
Mm-hmm.
good. Happy to be here. But no, more specifically, I think sometimes I try to be vague during these little quick intros and not give away too much of the episode ahead, but folks can read the title on the little device upon which they received their podcasts. So we're talking about Lost tonight, and that puts me in such a good mood. I have some, really wonderful memories with my wife tied to this show, so I'm great, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing phenomenally well, and I was already excited to dig into this episode, as you mentioned. I'll hit people with a little spoiler as well. I thought of you and your love for cryptids when Hurley shouted out the chupacabra. And I was curious, Kris, as an expert in cryptids, or at least a lover of cryptids, did you feel satisfied with Hurley's definition of the chupacabra? He said, it's like this bear with spines, but Mexican.
Yeah, like in general, if somebody else provided said description or explanation, I would say no. Try again, please. But from Hurley, it's utterly charming. I'll accept anything that he has to say.
Yeah, sure. I wasn't sure I was comfortable with the whole bear definition. And certainly the myth and the legend of the chupacabra extends far beyond the nation of Mexico. But yeah, it's Hurley. You can't not love Hurley. It's why he went so early in our draft, right?
That's right.
Except that he dies.
Good reason. We'll talk about that later. Just wait.
Yes. Uh, Bookers, I introduced the show as Media Lit, and of course that was accurate, but we are actually gathered here this evening for the latest installment in our Lost in Lit recurring series. We previously covered White Rabbit with our friend John Aspler. We recently had a bunch of buddies who were kind enough to join us for a two-part draft and pitch, which was an absolute blast. And also hands down like our top most interacted with episode in the history of Media Lit. So it was really fun to get out there interacting with the Lost community. It was an absolute and total blast. And one of those very special friends was kind enough to return and pitch us one of their favorite episodes of Lost. So I would like to welcome back to the show at this time, James. James, how you doing tonight?
I'm great. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Couldn't wait. So stoked you're back. And you picked a good one. I'm excited for this episode.
I just watched it this morning again in
Hmm.
preparation for this evening, and it is just a delightful episode.
It's good TV. I mean, on its own, context of the series, great episode, just great TV on its own. But again, we'll get there.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll get into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about Lost in Lit with this plan to just really jump through Lost at random in true Desmond Hume fashion. But it's really kind of forcing me to take each episode on its own merits, and that held true here again. Speaking of merits, we also have our resident Lost scholar joining us tonight. We've got John Aspler back for his fourth Lost in Lit episode. John, how you doing tonight?
I'm great. So excited to be back again. I love talking about Lost. I will take any episode. Doesn't matter where it is in the series, how high or low you rank it. I'm into it. I'm excited.
I'm going to formally petition the podcast now, co-host Randy. If we're going to have John coming on as resident Lost expert,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a PhD, we have to call him Dr. John as he joins us each given time. So, Dr. John, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for being here tonight.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah, we can go ahead and approve that right here, right now. Seconded.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. John.
Okay. Well, with that said, it is time for us to get into Lost, episode 317, Catch-22. And to our fair podlings out there in the podcast land, I have to warn you, we're going to spoil this episode. It came out a long time ago, but I still feel the need to warn you that we're going to spoil this episode. Everything that Lost has ever done is on the table. Everything that anybody has ever thought about Lost is on the table. People have written about this show. People have talked about this show, and we're going to do some more of that here tonight. Apologies in advance if you've never seen this show.
Absolutely. And if you have never watched Lost, but you just love us that much that you're here anyway, I think you can use these spoilers to your advantage when you finally get to your full rewatch.
Speaking of spoilers, I'm also going to look to spoil our draft and pitch series. Given that we have two of the guests here, I want to go back and just reminisce a bit there first. I want to hear a little bit about maybe what you guys would do differently, given the chance to do it again, and maybe something you loved from somebody else's pitch. John, we'll go to you first. Is there anything about your own pitch that you wish you had done differently, communicated more effectively?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this because I generally was very happy with how my draft turned out. I was thinking, what if I'd gotten a different character? Would that have been better? But, the creative juices got flowing and I just had a lot of fun with it. I think as I started to come up against the ticking clock and realize that I was maybe speaking a little too long, I don't know that I got too deep into my episodic or procedural engine. I sort of talked a little bit about how, one of the characters has these visions of alternate worlds and the multiverse. And, some episodes would be normal flashbacks. We need to know what Gion's been doing since she was literally 3 years old. We need to know what's been going on with Ben for 20 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you mix traditional flashbacks with sort of an experimental vision process and how do the visions work? Do they get to a new world and Gion gets all the visions in her head all at once? Or does she touch people and objects and things and at, the precise moment in the episode when we need some sort of download of something and then we get a little bit of information? All of these are cool ideas, but probably overwhelming to throw into what, in today's TV environment is likely going to be a 10-episode season. So, being a little clearer about what that procedural engine looks like, maybe just the touching people and objects visions with occasional traditional flashbacks might be the way to go. But yeah, I was sort of all over the place with that. I was like, we can do we were going to have flash forwards. We're going to do flash sideways, whatever, who knows? So I think I would have been a little bit more clear and purposeful in my choices around that.
Can you imagine what this conversation would actually sound like as the showrunner in the writer's room trying to hash all this stuff out and make sure you can do it in your sad allotted 10 episodes? I do love the idea of the tactile flashes. That's really, really good. Before we do your moment from somebody else's pitch, I want to hear from James. James, is there something you would do different from your pitch?
Well, I mean, I was also very happy with how my draft went. I wish that I could have gotten Charlotte Lewis in there instead of Achara, but that is how it goes. That is the way the cookie crumbles. But if I were going to do something differently, the only kind of regret that I guess that I have, and this is just by nature of the limitations of the pitch itself. But I felt that my original lead protagonist character did was kind of flat, was kind of being dragged through, was kind of incidental, because I was much more focused on the we're gonna get to play around in Dharmaville in the 70s. Which is which was the part of it that was most appealing to me, obviously.
I won't ever apologize for Asher. I think that you did the right thing, giving the tattoo a timey-wimey explanation. That was one of my favorite parts of the pitch, so no apologies.
Yeah, that's canon for me that Achara learned to tattoo folks on the island. It's just the truth now.
She's a temple dweller.
Yeah.
We just never saw her.
Yeah, it's the very best. All right, Randy, what about you? Something that you would do differently?
Like everyone else, I had such a blast with my pitch. I know how much it meant to me. I loved it. However, I wish I had, this is a bit rich coming from me because I was the one on that second podcast who could not shut up with a really lengthy pitch. Nevertheless, I wish I had spoken a bit more about my intentions for the character of Charlie Pace. I don't know if I fully communicated that, despite some flaws I have with the Charlie character, I do think they executed a really beautiful arc for that character. And I don't know if I fully communicated that my villainous echo of Charlie was literally just all of the leftover crap he had let go. I was not trying to undo the growth that Charlie experienced by the end of his life. That would be my big fix.
I, I think it's maybe a reactive fix. You've heard the fans who were concerned about Dark Charlie, and you felt they needed a further explanation of why this is justified. I think for me, if you guys recall, I packaged it as a mini series rather than the beginning of a potential ongoing season over season experience. And I think I had at the heart of it the idea of an apocalypse as something we understand to be sort of an end of the world, an end of things, but it's not, right? I argue that definitionally it's a revealing of things, a revelation. But things do die and pass away. And I wish I had done a better job of communicating how the segmented parts of that miniseries, the 2 cycles of 7, culminating in a 15th final episode, sort of spoke to similar ancient Eastern ideas of completion and cycles and the death of one world, quote unquote, and the realization of something on the other side of a revelation in that loss. So I took some heat for killing off Hurley, and I suppose I wish I had helped tie that thematically to the idea of an apocalypse, of the island going through yet another death cycle, so it could come to a new version of what it's meant to be. So, yeah, you win some, you lose some. I am sorry I killed Hurley. Right.
If you hadn't killed Hurley, there wouldn't have been an opportunity for Ghost Hurley and Ghost Libby to hang out. So you gave them their first afterlife ever after, for their second afterlife ever after, before the unknown third afterlife, who knows ever after, right? So you were just right there, filling the gaps, giving them the motivation. It was, I gave you some shit for it earlier, but it works on that level for me for sure.
Thank
exactly
you.
the level of eternal happiness that Hurley deserves.
Yes.
You all get it. See, this is why you have conversations with true Losties, right? Because you all get it, and that I appreciate about you. Let's celebrate each other now, then, since John already kind of started on it. James, we'll start with you. Is there something from somebody else's pitch that you really enjoyed?
Well, and yes, of course. And I'm not just saying this because he's on the line with us, I promise. But I love the mind bendy approach that John took to his pitch. I feel like John, like what I really loved about it was that it felt more like, as much as it's like a continuation of Lost, it is also a spiritually following in the footsteps of Damon Lindelof's later work, and feeling like it has more in common with stuff like The Leftovers, especially, which I feel like is a beautiful place to take a follow up to Lost, because I do feel like those shows are in conversation with each other.
So lovingly
Take
said.
it, love it, amazing.
so lovingly
yeah, great
stated.
call.
And I don't think he'd said it just because he's here listening to us.
I'm not.
I believe you. No, I mean that. But so as to not put John on the spot, we'll go to Randy. Randy, what is something you want to celebrate from our panel of Losties?
Sure. There was so much to love here. I'm not going to make you sit through all of them, but I had a note for everyone. But right now, I think I want to pay it forward to James. There were a lot of things I loved about that pitch, and one little angle of it that I was particularly excited by was the idea that we could see more of Eloise and Charles Widmore and get a better sense of what the heck that relationship would have and could have been. That's the kind of background that I might have enjoyed a little bit more than the Temple in season 6, something like that, to fill in some of that lore and some of that character development a bit more, so that when we get Charles Widmore returning to the island, that could have had so much more like weight and meaning attached to it. So that really got my imagination flowing, and it was one of my favorite moments of the draft and pitch.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you so much. And I mean, like, yeah, I mean, that was kind of what I was getting at least, because like I do feel that like Charles Widmore as a character and Eloise, but like both Eloise to a slightly lesser extent, but Charles Widmore especially, I feel were such big, important characters to the lore of the show for a time. And then we kind of reached a point where they were less so. In a way that I do find slightly disappointing. Like obviously I love the end of the show, but in terms of the list of things that I feel like I feel like this could have been maybe handled slightly differently. I would say like Walt, Charles Widmore, and Eloise Hawking are all way up there, which is why I really prioritized them as my draft picks.
Again, just well said. See, the more we do this, the more I wish we could be seeing these shows, these things come to life, and continue living in this world. It's a torturous exercise as much as I enjoy it. All right, John, your turn. What do you think?
Well, so I was going to actually start with something pretty similar to what Randy said. Again, not just because James is on the call, but specifically my favorite moment from your draft, James, was talking through Eloise's approach to and her fatalism as she learns of what's happened. That is something that I would have loved to have seen more on the show, because the show, especially in season 5, was so invested in dramatic irony and the question of like, are we the cause of our own suffering? Sometimes literally, yes, we are, because we try to shoot child Ben and things go badly. So having Eloise, like, I loved when you were saying that, Eloise was going to be like, no, the child's already dead while she was still pregnant. And then she was just going to give up on her relationship with Widmore. I think that's a really important theme. I think that might be an important theme for today's discussion of Catch-22, perhaps. So, that was, for me, that was a great moment. But again, it's almost a very similar moment to what Randy said. So instead, what I'm going to say is I really like the idea of Mr. Echo and Charlie as these like, black and white, good and evil, dark Charlie, Mr. Echo foils and spiritual guides, because that's another sort of open wound on the show of Lost is Mr. Echo's death. And I would have loved to have seen more of him, his relationship to Charlie, his relationship to Locke, and you get all three of them in one show. So for me, I love that you immediately set them up as this yin and yang on your slides and stuff. It was, great choices.
Thank you so much. And Dr. John, did you just pull off a masterful media lit style smuggle with 2 full responses to that question? Because I've never been more proud of you. So thank you so much.
This is a lesson in trusting your podcast instincts. I should have put myself earlier, because I also want to celebrate Namaste, James's pitch.
Nice.
I considered here, as you guys continued to speak, I considered going back and refreshing myself and formulating a new answer for the sake of variety. And that would be disingenuous. I can't do that, because when I revisited, I had the pleasure of doing the socials for this one and putting together little pitch posts with the summaries. And I just want to go live in this moment on the island, right? Like, this time frame is so rich with action that was implied in the original story. All these nice little morsels of breadcrumbs that I would just love to see play out. It also puts you in a time period that allows you to develop this story, contribute to the story that we've already experienced without really endangering it too much, because they were vague about that time period. And so we're not dealing with a future on the island where we have to justify things like Ben and Hurley and leadership and what's happening post the events of the show. I love that it goes back. I've also just been really interested in the wrestling, the leadership dynamics at that time on the island, how we oscillate between Eloise and Charles. I want to be there. I want to experience it. And I was not being facetious. I love taking the time in a series like this to redeem something like Achara and the tattoo. I think that is why you do something like this to an extent, right? You want to tell new, great story and pay off some things for the fans, the folks who have loved this show and maybe have loved it by poking fun at it once in a while, right? So, yeah.
And what is Lost if not a show of redemption?
Brilliantly said.
James, that brings me to a quick smuggle, because I just wanted to shout out Kris's whole Armageddon rebirth sort of concept from the pitch. I love the whole thing, but there's that moment where you talked about this final shot of seeing the jungle, and there's both like ripe fruit and rotting fruit upon the ground to like show all the levels of the cycle. I've got to shout out our buddy Leah for the Flash Miles. Nothing would be more brilliant than making Miles the device for your flashes in the show. And then for Shruti, my favorite detail was time travel, but only at 35,000 feet in the air was such a freaking cool twist. It's like a nice little play on Back to the Future, 88 miles per hour, but like up in the air. And it started as just a device to get Lapidus in the mix, which made it even better. So loved those moments.
Now I want to attend like the film school film festival where this was the project and we all had to make like a short film that realizes these visions. Experience all of it.
This podcast was modeled after a class, so there you go.
Well said. Well, obviously we are some folks who love this experience that was Lost, and if you're interested in hearing more about the ways in which Randy, myself, or John relate to the show or have loving memories of it, go back and listen to our very first Lost and Lit episode where we talked about White Rabbit. But tonight we're going to talk about still.
Kris, got to interrupt you quickly because we know almost everything there is to know about John and his history with Lost, but it turns out when we met with him for White Rabbit, he left out a very, 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 very important piece of his Lost history in regards to a very special gift he received upon completion of his PhD. And I've received John's permission to share this gift with the podcast tonight. And you might have some reactions to it.
Dr. John, Randy, what are you both up to?
All right. Gonna roll the tape here.
Hello, John. Terry O'Quinn here, whom I believe you know as John Locke. And I am here to say congratulations on your coming convocation day. Your PhD in neuroscience from McGill, right up there in one of my favorite places. Congratulations, my brother. Well done. Now, when you get your PhD, please save the world. This little island that we're all spinning on right here, trying to work our business out. That's my philosophy of Lost, by the way. It's just, that's as far as it extends. It's not terribly imaginative, but yes, that we're all on the island, spinning here in space and trying to work out our business. Poorly. But as happened in the show, sort of, we were, some were good at it, some were bad at it. And John Locke was, interesting name that they picked, John Locke, for that character. But that's neither here nor there. He was kind of desperate, wasn't he? For meaning. People said he was a man of faith. He said, I'm a man of faith. He was a man who had apparently an endless supply of faith, but nowhere to aim it until he found the island. But he was really desperate to have faith in something, wasn't he? And congratulations on the PhD. Take care. Keep working it out. Help us all, my man.
Can I just say? At the point in the cameo when Terry O'Quinn starts talking about the character John Locke, he sounds nearly indistinguishable to the Man in Black.
Whoa.
In the way, in his estimation of that character.
Wow. As an actor, I imagine he had to go to that place where both characters live inside of him, right? John and the Man in Black, as he considers John. What a cool thing, dude. That is really, really awesome. I can't believe I just heard him say the words, like, here's my philosophy on Lost, and then just proceed to explain. My goodness.
Yeah, it was such a surprising experience. But my in-laws were very kind to send this to me, and I don't know if they timed it like this, but we were literally driving in the car to my convocation, and I got like a ding on my phone, and I saw like Cameo, and I was like, "Well, that's weird. Why would I be getting a cameo?" And so I watched it in the car, and it was fantastic, wonderful.
Yeah, what an incredible surprise. And I mean, quite frankly, I think a lot of what Terry O'Quinn had to say was present in our draft and pitch, right? Like we got a lot of those same things out of the show. And part of why I love the character of John Locke is, I do agree with that idea that unfortunately he struggled to find a place to aim all of his faith. It made him, amenable to coercion and things like that. But that I could love that character anyway and still want to see the best for him. So, John, thank you so much for letting us share that. Thought it'd be a fun moment. Still can't believe we did not talk about that on your first appearance.
I forgot. I don't know. I just forgot it existed. I don't know how I forgot it existed, but the pandemic was a weird time. What can I say?
Weird time.
Yeah. And you're clearly just like cooler than me because I would talk about my cameo every single day.
Yeah, totally. I'd have like a t-shirt with a screenshot from it printed on the front. Well, I don't love being interrupted on the pod, but that was a wonderful interruption. That was really, really great. But back to my excellent segue, it's time for us to get into the personal connections bit of this Lost and Lit chat. James, you picked Catch-22, but before we get into the episode, I'm excited to ask you about the show itself. Let's do it.
Well, it is my favorite show of all time. I love it very much. I started watching it in 2006. It was during the mid-season break of season 3 when I started watching. I had picked up on iTunes a free recap episode of the first 2.5 seasons narrated by Kyle MacLachlan, which is one of my greatest like Lost fan like shames, is that so much of those first like 40 episodes were completely spoiled for me, outside of how they were intended to be. But after watching that, I did go. It was me and my older sister went to Blockbuster like that day and picked up the first like couple discs of season 1. And by the time I caught up, the first episode of the show that I watched live was Enter 77, the Saeed episode from the middle of season 3 where we go to the flame station. So consequently, like this run of episodes of like the home stretch of season 3 is just very, very near and dear to my heart because I was just so deep like in it. Like I was so excited to be caught up and watching it week to week. I was listening to 3 different podcasts on Lost at the time. And and this episode is just, I mean, like I wouldn't even say that this is like my favorite episode from that run, but it is one that I feel is often overlooked and is a very excellent episode.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. Now, James, you just did hint at this a bit, but I was curious as that fandom was coming together in that, incredible stretch. I mean, the end of season 3, that might be the most like just crowd pleasing and firing on all cylinders that this show has ever been. Do you have any? Can you possibly zoom in on a specific moment or two that's just kind of emblazoned in your memory from that run? That like it just lives in your head all the time. It really helped cement it.
I mean, like the boring and obvious answer is we have to go back. Like it's hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to not imagine like being in my living room with my entire family, like watching that episode and have Kate step out from the shadows outside of LAX and have my mom be like, "Wait, they knew each other before?" And we're all like, you know, like, but other than that, I mean, watching The Man Behind the Curtain for the first time was absolutely top five Lost experience, just because we've been following this character for now almost two full seasons. He has completely affixed himself into the center of the show, and we
Mm-hmm.
finally are peeling back the layers of that character in a way that we've been doing with our principals for the entire run.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, obviously, the scene in the cabin and the end of the episode are both just like, oh my god, you know.
Oh yeah.
So like it's just I'm lost, unintended.
Hmm.
Living in these moments. You're right, Randy. You were right to say that this this period of the lost momentum was. I didn't get to experience it live, but even like on a binge, like there's just so much momentum. There's so much
Mm-hmm.
story happening, so much to chew on. It's excited to be here. Well, James, tell me a little bit more about how Lost has then influenced other media you've taken in, or your interest in style and story. Did this lead you to other similar types of stories?
Well, I mean, absolutely, yeah. I feel like this was like the watching of Lost was very very early in my watching of television for adults. Basically, I was in sixth grade when I started watching it. The only other like big network drama that I had seen prior to this was 24, which I really liked. You know, I had come in at like season six of 24, like completely blind, and was like, oh wow. Yeah. But then like watching Lost, like which itself was like already tapping into the kinds of genre stuff that I already enjoyed, you know, and just kind of like seeing that on television was like, oh my God, like this is everything. Like this has completely unlocked a part of my brain and I need more of it, you know? So I spent so much time after that just trying to find like what's going to fill that hole in my soul that Lost has left
Mm.
behind. And I've watched many of the imitators. I have seen Flash Forward. I have watched the event. I have watched Heroes in its entirety. You know, but then there are the imitators that I find like that are honestly more recent that I find really do understand what made that show so good and what people like about it. And I find that
Mm-hmm.
with both Yellow Jackets and Severance. Like are the
Mm-hmm.
first I feel of these imitators that it feels demeaning to call them imitators. I don't mean to like because these are excellent shows, but they are both very clearly inspired by Lost and the Lost zeitgeist, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
they how they expressed and deployed their mysteries for the audience to engage with them. And I feel like those two shows are the first examples I can think of that kind of show being made by people who clearly were in dark UFO chat room between the years of 2004 and 2010, you know. And I find that to be incredibly delightful to experience again. I find that I just really enjoy just like big epic casts, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed Song of Ice and Fire. I have very recently been going down a Stephen King rabbit hole that was
Oh.
started by me finally picking up The Stand back in
Yeah.
September, and I fell in love with that immediately. And I feel like that is like a codex for understanding what they were going for in that Lost Raiders room. And obviously, I'm not the first one to have that thought. That is something that they have said many, many
Yeah.
times on the record. But just to like experience it and be like, oh, wow, there are things that are lifted directly from this book and put into this show.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, not even just the season one stuff. Like
Yeah.
it's been over a decade since I read The Stand. I think it's the rescue of maybe it's the trash can man from the prison.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
like, like they were using The Stand way back in season one, but I'm picturing like um Abe Turno with, Richard chained to the Black Rock, and they were still pulling from it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And even I would say, like the bomb in the bedroom,
Mm-hmm.
like that's set up, like this, the way the scene plays out is very, very similar to the bomb on the submarine in The Candidate.
Absolutely. And I don't think you were trying to be cruel calling some of those other shows imitators. I've scoured YouTube trying to find this promo. I believe it was for the event, but I could be wrong. But there was a promo on television I remember seeing, and it was literally the voiceover voice coming in and saying, "If Lost and 24 had a baby, it would be the event."
Clearly, I was intended to be the audience. However,
No, I think that
It was
is such a-
wild. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kris.
No. I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's such a good distinction to make between imitators who are truly trying to catch that spark, right, or just cashing in on an association or a momentum thing in the zeitgeist versus 20 years later series that have just they've been influenced. It's so clear that this was art that these creators took in and were influenced
Mm-hmm.
by, and now they're telling their own stories with all the echoes of this within it, like great music, right? There's a difference between imitation and an influence.
Yeah. Yeah, and no hate for the event or Flash Forward. I would have watched another season of Flash
A
Forward.
little hate.
I also would have watched another season of Flash
Same.
Forward
Same.
just to see where if they were ever gonna get there. You know, like because there were some promising storylines. There was some promising
Mm-hmm.
casting. It was just like, what are
Yeah.
we doing?
I just want to very briefly shout out my favorite of its time Lost imitator that was canceled unceremoniously after like 9 episodes. It's an extremely niche show called Defying Gravity, starring Ron Livingston. And the thing that reminded me of it was the promo you just mentioned, sort of like merging Lost and was it 24? So in this case, it was Lost meets Grey's Anatomy in space. And I was
Mm.
like, okay, that sounds fun. And it was. It was delightful. And the thing that it did better than the event, better than Flash Forward, was I actually cared about the extended cast. Those for me were the biggest
Mm.
problems with those shows. The mystery it was fine. They were interesting, but like no one was that compelling. Their relationships weren't that compelling. I don't know that they did chemistry casting reads and stuff. Like there just was a lot of lack of chemistry. But Defying Gravity, it was all chemistry. So it really worked even when it was,
Nice.
not amazing.
I agree. I think that I mean I haven't seen Defying Gravity, but I mean in terms of your diagnosis, I think you're absolutely on point as far as where these other shows have succeeded. Because I do think that like these people get so caught up on the mystery and like the entire and like oh we have to have a big cast and they kind of end up being perfunctory.
Mm.
Defying Gravity is just giving me wicked. Every time you said the title, I just hear it belting out in my head. I don't know if that helped or hurt
weeks.
the show, but
Now I missed that one, but I'll be looking it up. So thank you for that. Thank you for that pitch. All right, James. I just want to know you briefly shouted out your mother earlier. As I've said many times on this podcast, I'm such a big fan of when you show up on Shruti's podcast, Chaos on the Set. So those might be some avenues to answer this question, or perhaps I've barely scratched the surface. But do you associate your Lost fandom with any particular relationships in your life?
Oh, for sure. Definitely. Well, because most specifically, I would say my girlfriend of 12 years. I would say we part of our like getting close was me getting her to watch Lost, and we would be just like she would be texting me like minute by minute update of the show as she was watching it. And a lot of that really did kind of form like the foundation of what would become our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I do always like, Lost is very near and dear to my heart in more ways than one. But also even uh taking a step back from that, I at the time it was on and even after I was a Lost evangelist. There were many times when I would
Mm-hmm.
just like sit people down in my life and be like, all right, we're gonna watch the first 4 episodes of Lost. Strap in. No, you don't have a
Yes.
say in this. You
Mm-hmm.
and I had a 100% success rate.
yeah, it feels like inappropriate, like relationship test in a friendship or otherwise. to take in some Lost and like see how do you feel about the themes at play here? Like, which side of the conversation do you fall on? Some important tests. Okay. Time to get maybe a little critical. This is a Hallmark question. The Media Lit format. James, you love this show that is Lost, but does it have any flaws?
Oh, absolutely, it has flaws. I love it, not just in spite of those flaws, but often because of those flaws.
Oh, yes, yes.
I think that we should be so lucky as to have a show as beautifully flawed as this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. And knowing the outline, I'm sure we'll get a chance to dig into those. But yeah, this special setup of getting 20 plus episodes per season most of the time almost requires you to make some mistakes, but it also leads to some of the show's greatest victories, like Ben Linus and so many others.
To James's point, some of the story flaws, the things that especially those who are only vaguely associated or familiar with the show would call out as far as what they consider to be flaws in the show, that is part of what makes the show so great if you're really in it and you're really paying attention. The flaws you would name are more related to like a lot of the time stuff, to your point, Randy, a lot of like how TV got made at the time and how they thought they had to relate certain types of characters to certain demographics of the audience. And that's where a lot of the stuff you could nitpick today really lives for me.
Yeah, and I feel like if I was going to get more specific, I guess I would say like the flaws that I feel are less charming are more like certain characters that I feel got the short shrift by the end of the show. Saeed in particular.
No, I think that's absolutely perfect. All right, folks. We got together. We reminisced. We honored our special guest, James, and their unique experience with Lost. But now it's time to move on to the meat and potatoes of this show, which is where we dig into this one episode of television as if it were a great piece of literature. And tonight we're going to be talking about an episode of Lost titled Catch-22. This is Season 3, Episode 17, originally aired April 18th, 2007. One noteworthy detail is that it shares a name with the famous satirical novel by Joseph Heller. And we get a very direct connection to that novel when we learn that the parachutist has a Portuguese copy of that novel in her pack. So before we go any deeper, it is time for me to dive into an episode synopsis. Especially for any loyal podlings who are along for the ride, despite the fact that they've never seen this episode or it's been a minute. In flashback, we see Desmond complete his vow of silence and be welcomed as a brother in a monastery. No sooner does Desmond find peace in his new life than an unexpected visitor arrives and punches him in front of his monk bros. In an attempt to smooth things over, Desmond visits his ex-fiancée and appeals to her spiritual side for forgiveness. Ruth cuts through this act like a pro and makes it very clear to Desmond that he is simply scared of commitment, responsibility, and personal sacrifice. This throws Desmond into a shame spiral, and he gets drunk off of the monastery's signature wine. He is subsequently fired from his position. Thankfully, this clears the way for Desmond to fall for the clever, confident, Christmas-loving Penny Widmore. It's the meet cute heard round the world. Over in the island timeline, Desmond is seeing a new set of future flashes that culminate in the gruesome booby trap death of Charlie Pace. Desmond has already been using similar flashes to save Charlie from death, but this time, he isn't so sure he wants to change the outcome. This time, the flashes end with a parachutist in a tree, and Desmond believes it is Penny. Desmond sets out to create the conditions from his visions and gathers a very chill expedition team consisting of Charlie, Hurley, and Jin, who is led to believe that this is all a simple camping trip. Charlie can tell that Desmond is hiding something and continuously calls out his suspicious behavior. Charlie suspects that this expedition has to do with another vision of his own impending demise, and he wants to know why Desmond is suddenly being so secretive. In the closing moments of the episode, he realizes that Desmond was planning to let him die before a last-second change of heart. Of course, they don't have much time to fight about it because they finally find the parachutist. All signs point to a big Penny reveal, but when Desmond removes the helmet, we see another woman. Sadly, it's not Penny. But at least this moment will help make a later Season 4 phone call particularly magical. All right, folks. If anyone has any details they want to add to that synopsis, maybe something you wish I had emphasized in that main overview, feel free to hop in.
I think that you nailed the most important beats of the episode. For the first time ever, perhaps I'll take some umbrage. We'll get to it later when I have a chance to highlight some things I learned from the episode. But there's a whole B plot here that includes a Top Gun-esque beachside sportathon. So I just, maybe it could have found its way in there somewhere.
I think that's a really fair criticism. And if anyone's listening and worried about that, we have got a heck of a do you ship it segment coming up later on. So I think we'll get to go deep on all those relationship dynamics.
Okay. No, in all seriousness, a lovely, lovely recap. As always, you even managed to add some of the weight of the future Penny and Desmond relationship that going back and rewatching this makes so much richer the episode. But speaking of this episode, now that we're here, I want to hear from the group more about why we think this is so important to the overall Lost experience, to the greater canon. James, we will start with you. What do you think? How do you see this fitting into the greater story?
So, I think that as Desmond is one of the most important characters of the show for at least a very long stretch of it, I do think that this is one of the more revealing episodes about him as a person. You could uncharitably say that this is covering similar ground that we see in Flashes Before Your Eyes, at least as far as Desmond's fear of responsibility. But I do think that it's so interesting to tie that fear of responsibility to something greater. Like him needing to have some kind of no, I am not just this. I am this because I am meant for something larger and I am not treated as such. And that's less of an element here. I think we see that. I think that his position and his station is is more something that we touch on in his first flashback when we see him interact with Charles Widmore and why he feels the need to race around the world, and how it starts from this place of I am looking for I want to get right with God, basically, to no, I just need to prove that I am worthy and I'm going to do so. I'm going to pin all but what does worthy mean to me? And how am I going to make that manifest in my life? And, his incorrect answer to that question was to hop on a sailboat and race around the world. But the truer answer to that question is the lengths that he will go to just save this guy who he kind of likes. He's a nice enough guy. But I do love getting to see in this episode how frustrated Desmond is with the whole endeavor of saving Charlie over and over and over again, and how frustrated he is that this is the greater calling that he's been called to.
I love that. That kind of ties a little bit into how I was feeling about this too, right? Because I think, to quote Tom Holland's Spider-Man, before we got to in the MCU, with great power, yada yada, Spider-Man just simply explains that when you can do something, when bad things happen, and you could do something to stop it, but you don't. They happen because of you. And that's what we see Desmond wrestling with here. Like, he doesn't really particularly care about Charlie. There's not like, it's not his best buddy or anybody that he has particular affection for. He doesn't really even see Charlie as some important connected part of a greater community. It's just more pure. If you see somebody's going to die and there's something you could do to stop it, wouldn't you? You would hope, right? But I think more importantly with Desmond in this particular episode, I think you start to explore at least what I think is important to the series, like our striving for big sort of life-defining actions and choices and understanding of who we are, to the point where we will just bump into a monk and decide to join the monastery. I love the joke that Ruth makes. Good thing it wasn't a shepherd, or you'd be off with the sheep. Because Desmond, like many of our characters, is looking for something that will help define them. But who we are is in the little choices every day, like one day at a time. It's not in some big overarching philosophy for how we will live our lives. It's in the small choices that we're faced with. And in this episode, he's faced with a very specific, big, but small choice, one choice to act on saving Charlie or not. So I think philosophically, this episode fits really well into the whole series.
And I would also just say that if Trisha Tanaka is dead is the last of like the fun island adventures, this episode is almost a nod to the fact that time is over, because it's like we're going on this little camping trip, and Desmond knows that it's more than that. Hurley knows there's something more going on with that. But this kind of group that we have is a very B plot group. It's a very like, oh, we're gonna go off and we're gonna do like, we're gonna go find a frog in the woods. But then we kind of have that completely inverted in this episode, where our A tier characters are doing B plot story and our B plot characters are doing A plot story. That becomes like the engine that drives the rest of the season.
Love that. John, what about you? I see you gearing up, Dr. John, to hit us with some thoughts.
Well, I was just going to completely agree. My original response was largely going to be that it's, although the season 4 premiere is called the beginning of the end, I really do think the Catch-22 is the actual beginning of the end. Like goodbye to innocence of the fun camping trip and the hello, killing Anthony Cooper in the brig in cold blood and greatest hits, one of the biggest tear jerkers of all time. To like, this is really, I feel like this episode is the beginning of the end for real. So for sure, for me, that's why it's important in the context of the show. And then otherwise, everything you've both said about sort of Desmond, agency, and the context of his decisions in these episodes, I think that's a huge theme for all of Lost. The question of fate versus free will, the question of what kind of responsibility do we have when we are granted knowledge of the future? I'll be talking, I think, more about this later in the literature section, but there's a lot going on here with Desmond as a character who is unique at this point in time, uniquely burdened with foreknowledge. And so, as you said, Kris, like if you know that something's bad is going to happen, do something. Well, Saeed tries that a little bit later, and that doesn't go so great for everyone, does it? So it's a really interesting theme, and I think Desmond is doing the right thing. And I'm this is something that I think there is an appropriate approach to this, and I think Desmond gets it right here. We're going to talk about how I think Kate gets it right later, but yeah, it's a really interesting challenge, and I don't know that the show knows what it's going to say about time travel and agency in the future. I don't know if it believes at this point in time that time is fixed. It might already think that, but for me, this is a very important episode because it really feeds forward into these conversations about agency, fate. And if we bring it back to the sort of like monk theme, well, was it actually all, coincidence and a higher purpose fate, or was it Eloise Hawking manipulating Desmond through the monk? And these are important questions. Who is the greater power here? It might just be Eloise in this case.
This is Hawking. Dang. Randy, any thoughts to add on the importance of this episode?
Yeah. I think I'm just going to build on what our very brilliant guests have already said here, but I'm going to focus on the Charlie side of things. Is quite a religious episode here, so I guess as an act of penance for my dark Charlie pitch. Charlie pretty much knows what's up the second Desmond looks him in the eye and asks him to go on this expedition. And he's angry and he's very Charlie about it. But he does pick up the guitar and he does go, right? Like these are the seeds of greatest hits. It's exhausting for Desmond to try to save his life forever, but weirdly enough, it's scary for Charlie to feel that he's under this constant threat. He's got to look to some outside force to come and rescue him at all times, or he can take back some agency. So I think this is a big step on this journey for him. At the end of the episode, he's still wanting to throw it back in the form of anger at Desmond, but we don't have too much time for that. And I think we see him grow. My other quick shout out was just Desmond and Brother Campbell. They're talking about biblical stories and what gods should or should not ask their followers to do. And in response to the story of Abraham, Desmond says, one might say that God needn't to have asked Abraham to sacrifice his son in the first place. And all I could think of was our future arc of, shitty island gods, punishing, testing, sometimes under extreme circumstances. And this open question of, is there a line of what someone should be asked to do to prove their faith? I'm not going to suggest what the answer should be, but the show's definitely concerned with that moving forward.
Very, very well said. When we first were assigned this episode, I think I remember it well. Who doesn't remember the helicopter escapist and in the book, right? Who doesn't remember the lead up to that? But it wasn't until really being in this conversation with you three that my appreciation deepened to the level that it's currently at. Love this. But speaking of that helicopter escapist and that book, there's a really specific literary reference at play for this episode. Catch-22. Now, it was written by an American. We see a Portuguese translation on the show. I mean, Lost does this a bunch. Randy, do you want to take us into a little discussion on Catch-22 as our resident English teacher?
Yeah, so essentially my question is going to be, why do you think this novel gets so much attention here? And I think I want to preface it by saying, I don't think that there was a high bar that a piece of literature had to cross for the creators of Lost to feel comfortable throwing it on our screens. They wanted us building our libraries and reading into the lines, not necessarily for answers, but for engagement. And if we think that this one belongs in the upper echelon of most important texts, I'll be happy to hear that argument. But it is the title of the episode. It does make an appearance. And I just wanted to give you one of the many definitions of a Catch-22 from that novel. It's kind of this catch-all bureaucratic term to, discuss these impossible expectations of war, these impossible sorts of rules. And we get many definitions. He was going to live forever or die in the attempt. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you. There was only one catch, and that was Catch-22, which specified that a concern for one's safety in the face of dangers that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind. So the Catch-22 here, the things I would highlight before I hear from everyone else would be, hypothetically, you could be released from your military service if you were proven not, mentally fit and able to perform your duties. But the catch is, if you are fearful of your life and acknowledging how dangerous these flight missions are, then you must have a rational and functioning mind, and therefore you are fit to return to the field. It's kind of a lose-lose situation, but what makes it a Catch-22 for me is when it's this sort of restriction that's been imposed upon someone. There's an intent to control or manipulate is part of my definition. That may or may not be all where we all took it. But yeah, Kris, I'm going to throw this one right back at you. Why do you think Catch-22 gets such prominent placement as the title of this episode?
Well, I think just cynically, I think in some ways it's really convenient and it's a fun
Mhm.
device and a show that is being so clever, right? It really just understands itself at this point, and it's really clever. And the book placement is also an opportunity to kind of build upon the mystery and get us thinking, those guys are speaking Portuguese. Is this connected, in fact, to Penny? And like
Mm.
it serves some specific devices. But what I really love as far as how it relates to the proper novel is almost an inversion of what's happening to our main character. Because Desmond is in the Catch-22 here, right? He's got a very impossible situation before him. He's desperate for Penny to arrive on the island. To secure her arrival, theoretically, he needs to let Charlie die. But there isn't the same tangible outside force putting him in this situation. He is. What he thinks he understands about what's happening with his flashes, what he thinks this particular flash means, his own desperation to be back with Penny, all of these things are informing how he's interpreting the choice that's before him. Previously, his choice to save Charlie didn't have such a complication, right? It was something that he had to sacrifice in order to go save Charlie. So it's really interesting to me. What I keyed in on was the inversion of this, that this isn't some sort of tangible authority. Now, maybe as we talk about Lost, there's a greater guiding force or manipulating hand at work here, but theoretically, he's putting himself in this really difficult position, which so many of us are prone to do. And I think Lost is really interested in exploring that.
James, what about you? Why do you think Catch-22 is at the center of the action here?
I mean, I think you guys have nailed it, basically. I mean, I read Catch-22 in high school once, and it is not one of the lost literary references, ironically, that I am closest with,
Mhm.
I would say. But I do think that it is mostly tacking on this impossible situation that Desmond is in. And it is just like this sense that he's going to lose no matter what, however that may manifest itself.
Absolutely. John, what are your thoughts?
So, just like James, I have not read this book in 20 something years. So I definitely spent a little bit of last night and earlier this evening, frantically Sparks notesing and Wikipediaing elements of Catch-22 as Randy pulls it up onto the screen. That is the edition that I remember reading at the time.
Same.
But so all that to say, I am certainly not in a strong position to discuss what I really think a Catch-22 is. But one of the things that I was really coming up against is that it seems to me that the essence of a Catch-22 is not only a lose-lose, but is sort of this like no like or I shouldn't even say a lose-lose. It's not like there are two different equally bad options. It's like the contradiction of rules leads to no good outcome, period. There's like some rules, they are
Hmm.
contradictory. Contradiction's really important. Absurdity is important. Justification of abuse of power is important. And in this particular case, one of the things I sort of come up against here is that it seems like Desmond's choice is let Charlie die and see Penny. That's sort of what he imagines the vision is saying, or save Charlie and ruin the future to see Penny. And to me, I think that's actually an allusion to what we might colloquially call a Sophie's choice rather than a Catch-22. But again,
Hmm.
I have not read the book in 20 plus years, so I'm not totally sure if that holds up. And I would love to know if any of you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I can jump in and say we get like a zillion definitions for Catch-22, Catch-22 also states that, officers in the hospital have to spend part of their day doing the job of censoring letters. Um, it also states that, you have to follow your superior's orders despite the alternately stated number of missions that you have to complete your tour of duty. So like it always pops in. It's just it's like this catch-all stand-in. Everything is a catch-22 to varying degrees of success. Now that I do have a couple theories of the things that I think come closest to being catch-22s in here. And I can share a couple of those, but I was curious if anyone else found themselves thinking of it that way. Does anyone else have a thought on what a catch-22 within this episode might look like?
Yeah, at least in the way the episode frames it through the lens of the characters who refer to it, right? I think that the sacrifice of Charlie is sort of loosely and kind of clumsily tied in parallel to the Abraham story and the sacrifice of Isaac, right? And so it's presenting that as a catch-22 in that Abraham wants to secure the blessings that the Lord has promised to him. And doing so means following through and being faithful to what the Lord asks. But the thing that the Lord promised him was this son, and a line that would come from that son. And so God's asking him to kill that son. To get God's blessing, he has to kill the son, but the son is sort of the path to God's blessing. It doesn't seem to make sense. It's a catch-22. It's absurd. And what's interesting to me as far as like how that being tied in here with the novel Catch-22 as the anchoring point or the focal point for the concept in the episode, again, you can look at the absurdity within the authority figure and think to yourself, like, something here doesn't make sense. But I think ultimately that's what Lost is asking us to do with whatever sort of transcendent power is at work, fate, or what have you. Decide if it can be trusted in these moments, right? Because that's ultimately what Abraham does. Like, it's not just that he listens to God and therefore he gets let off. I think there's all kinds of reasons to believe, if you read the story as literarily, that God never intended for Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. There's language that implies this. And Abraham trusted in the character of God that he already had gotten to know. He trusted that, okay, if he's asking this thing of me and I move forward with it, there's got to be a good purpose for all of this. Like whether it's Isaac will be resurrected or, whatever it might be. Somehow it can't be what it seems to be. And I think that is ultimately how Desmond relates to his choice, in that he doesn't want Penny, I think, in a way that isn't true to who he knows himself to be in terms of a good person. Like, he can't get to Penny by not saving Charlie. There's something very, very wrong about that. He can't believe that fate would actually ask that of him. And so he goes and saves Charlie. He trusts that saving Charlie is the right thing and that he'll get to Penny somehow if that's what he is heading toward. So I think the Abraham story is meant to be that parallel.
I love that, and I retract any and all complaints. I think exactly what you said. The Abraham and Isaac story is the Catch-22 that is clumsily linked to Desmond and Charlie, but that does have an effective potential resolution and connection in there. I love all that. Fantastic.
No, I think that's excellent. I completely co-sign on this as well. But if you'll allow me, I do think that there is another character who finds themselves in a mess of contradiction in this episode. One that goes unresolved in this episode, but will go on to be resolved much, much later. And that is Sawyer. Sawyer, who is caught in this situation of whether or not he wants to allow himself to be used by Kate. Because, I do think that, like, in retrospect, as knowing the whole story, this is the episode where it is certain that Kate and Sawyer are never going to happen. Like, and I think that is a realization that is dawning on Sawyer as well. And it is this catch-22 for Sawyer of, do I allow myself to be used by Kate knowing that I am her second choice, confirmed, even though it didn't seem that way 2 weeks ago. It is clear to me now that I am number 2 on her list of priorities. And I can settle for that and just be like, okay, let's have a good time, and I'm getting what I want, even though I know that I'm not what you want. Or I can not allow myself to be used, and I'll be alone, and I'll be unhappy, and I'll because I am destined to be unhappy because that's who I am.
Mm.
Oh,
I
so
love.
good. So sad. So good.
No, I love that so much, right? Because this is Sawyer at a point in his arc where he can't even convince himself anymore that he's the kind of guy who's going to believe that if he gets what he wants anyway, he's going to be happy. You even get that call back to, hey, I thought you weren't allowed to use nicknames anymore. Right? He's really been learning those lessons at the hands of one Hurley and other folks. My last Catch-22 thought is, in my personal self-imposed definition of a Catch-22, I mentioned there's got to be some kind of an authority. Um, I don't know if we have that directly. I think I would also like to say I co-sign everything Kris had to say. The authority of a god figure could be an example of what I'm talking about here for sure. Internally within the episode, a lot of these rules have been imposed upon Desmond by Eloise Hawking, earlier in Flashes Before Your Eyes. If you don't follow this path, we are all dead. Now, I think all of you have done a full rewatch of the series more recently than me, so please, please, please feel free to push back on what I'm about to say. Um, but I always felt like that was kind of a misleading statement from Eloise because my memory is the closest that comes to paying off is maybe in the Flash Sideways. Like I almost interpret this as she needs that place to exist because of her own fear of moving on to whatever lies behind that white light, right? So this is kind of a if I'm interpreting it that way anyway, it makes it this really disingenuous rule. Her definition of maybe what death means is really different. But you could also suggest that Desmond is his own sort of authority figure here because part of the tragedy of Penny and Desmond is that he let Charles Widmore shake him to his core with that glass of McCutcheon. And he's got this weird chip on his shoulder that he feels he needs to make himself worthy of Penny. That is, a really ugly thing that messes up their relationship, even though we see her standing there saying, you don't need the approval of my father or anyone else. We have something. Right. So if he doesn't save Charlie and he gets to see Penny, he might not feel like that man that he thinks he needs to be, who's worthy of Penny, right? So that could break things as well. Yeah. Great job on the Catch-22s, fellas. But this is an episode of Lost in Lit, so we've got to keep the door wide open to any sort of literary connections. So what I've proposed is a little roundtable. Going to give everyone a chance to shout out one other sort of literary or pop culture connection that this episode brings to mind. And, we can cycle around once. If we want to go back to anyone additional times, we can continue a little circle here. John, why don't you kick us off this time?
Well, so I might smuggle something in a little bit in the reverse order here. We've been talking about Lost as literature. We've been talking about the literature of Lost, and I still want to keep talking about the literature of Lost. But I also like to take a moment to maybe go in a third direction briefly, which is to talk about literature about Lost. So during the pandemic, I led a book club reading The Ultimate Lost and Philosophy, Think Together, Die Alone, which is an edited volume of essays on a bunch of philosophical topics. There's a whole series, the sort of ... and philosophy series for all of your pop culture philosophy needs. And The Ultimate Lost in Philosophy has 19 chapters by 19 different people on topics ranging from the metaphysics of time travel to can Michael ever be redeemed for his actions to sort of Narnia and The Island and those kinds of literary comparisons. So it's got all kinds of things going on. But one of the chapters that really struck me was an early one called It Doesn't Matter What We Do. That's the name of the chapter. And it was a chapter specifically, the subtitle is From Metaphysics to Ethics in Lost Time Travel. So it was really invested in the question of like, how does time travel work in Lost? And assuming we have an understanding of that, are people making right decisions? Are they okay? Are they making these decisions in a way that is actually ethical, or is it kind of bonkers what they're doing? And we talked about this a little bit earlier when, Kris was talking about the way that Desmond is uniquely burdened by his foreknowledge of Charlie's death and what that means to have to do the right thing. And I brought up I don't want to say counterexample, but the similar case of Saeed thinking, well, I'm going to do this horrible thing. I'm going to shoot a child because I think it will bring about a better world. And one of the things that this chapter really, really explores in a way that I really enjoyed was the idea that like our ordinary, everyday moral intuitions probably still count, even if we have weird, timey-wimey knowledge. And the example he uses is comparing what Saeed does, which is, I'm going to do a terrible thing to bring about a good, hopefully good end, and ultimately is, the architect of his own suffering. Jack takes the opposite fatalistic approach and says, nothing I do matters here. This is not the path I'm on. I don't care if Ben dies. And then Kate is the only person who says, we don't let children die and shoot them. So I'm going to go do something. And yes, she does do something that then leads to, in combination with Jack and Saeed, all of these things together. So anyway, I just wanted to bring this particular chapter up. There's a quote from it that I want to read that I found particularly helpful. Is it any excuse to say that whatever happens will happen? People are still responsible for their actions. Our ordinary views apply. And the fatalistic argument that nothing we do matters seems to be a mistake here. So we don't know at this point in the show in Catch-22 whether Desmond is truly, time special, if he can delay things, change small things, but not big things, and everyone else is locked in. This is not like the show is not clear about this. We only have Eloise who's told him the rules, and the rules are apparently you cannot stop major events. You can only change minor things or delay the major events, which is what he seems to be doing with Charlie. But at the same time, the show has a lot of feelings about agency and decision making and the right thing to do. And I think in this case, we have another example like Kate saving a child who's been shot in the past. We have Desmond who says, okay, I can't let Charlie die. I know that this is a thing that's going to happen. And so whatever our strange foreknowledge of a better world or a worse world might be, the idea that in the moment, even if we have no actual agency, if there is fate and the laws of time that are ruling what we're doing, we're still feeling that we're making choices. And we need to make those choices in those moments according to some kind of moral view. Like, we don't let children die, or I'm not going to let Charlie die because I know I can save him. I have this knowledge and I can make that happen.
John, I love that. C.S. Lewis, I'll paraphrase, but he says in Mere Christianity that, our choices, they're forming us into either something more heavenly or something more hellish. And that's what you're talking about, right? And what the show wants to explore is, regardless of the puppetry or not, how do our choices affect us deep inside? How do they inform the next choice we'll make? How do they inform the way we think about ourselves in the world? Our choices matter, even if it's all predetermined, because they affect us and how we experience all of this. They affect our peace and so on and so forth. I love that.
Kris, will you be offended if I count that as your first roundtable contribution?
I will, yes.
Well, I'm doing it anyway.
Fine.
James, what's your first contribution to the literary and/or pop culture roundtable?
So, as far as the way that Desmond's precognition is expressed to us, I do think that the show very much has Minority Report on its mind, both the book and the Steven Spielberg movie, especially in this episode when we actually see the method by which Desmond is seeing the future, and that it is something that he is then piecing together in real time, which is how we see the pre-crime people do it in their own way, in that there's a lot of dream interpretation element of the pre-crime that they are solving, which I always find is a very interesting approach to this kind of seeing the future, instead of it being just literally, this is what happens.
Yeah, looking into the foggy mirror, sort of.
Man, I love a Minority Report shout out. I love that movie. I've not read the book, interestingly enough. I'm going to start with just a quick one, which is, when I started watching Lost, I was late to the party. I was already a fresh new teacher. I was already teaching books like Lord of the Flies. So, as I started watching it, I wondered whether or not I would uncover anything that might help me teach that book. Um, Nothing super significant, right? There are references to Lord of the Flies. There's no direct parallel there really in those stories. We can pull some small things out. But sometimes you get little Easter eggy sorts of references. And as the boys on the island in Lord of the Flies are trying to process their emotions, they invent the concept of a beast, a beastie, a monster. There's something out there trying to get us. And you've got chapters titled Beast from Water and the Beast from the Air. And the beast from the air, we eventually learn, is a parachutist who's deceased, who's stuck up in some trees, and cast this really distorted, ghastly visage of like heaving and lurching as the parachute is moved by the limbs and branches of the trees. And we don't get something quite so grotesque here, but it does feel like a little bit of a nod. And when I think about what Kris was just saying about, do we want to become more beautiful or more hellish? Ultimately the beast in Lord of the Flies is within us, right? So maybe trying to keep that at bay felt like a little bit of a connection to me. John, do you have anything new for the roundtable?
I will take an obvious, easy in the show, in the text answer, and that is, of course, DC Comics, Flash, and Superman. One of the things that I think is really fun, of course, which they don't actually explicitly talk about, is that both Superman and the Flash are supposed to be able to go so fast that they can travel back in time. And that is not the approach they take to the discussion about Flash and Superman. They talk about vibrating through walls. So I don't know if that was on purpose. I assume that the writers of Lost know all about their superheroes. And then a few years after this, in 2011, the major DC story was something called Flashpoint, where only the Flash is aware of a multiversal shift in storytelling. Of course, it was actually a soft reboot for anyone who wanted to jump into comics. That was largely when I got into DC during the New 52. That was the branding. So all of these little time opportunities and multiversal opportunities, which Desmond's story seems to be pointing us toward just a little bit.
Love that
Perfect.
this discussion led us to a mention of the New 52. I think sometimes it gets some unfair hate from long time readers, but the Batman titles during the New 52 were fantastic. Really, really good.
Agreed.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I did have one more pop culture reference. I actually was not going to say anything deep in this segment. I was only going to have fun with it. Did nobody else get Top Gun beach volleyball homage from the ping pong with our two hunks? I mean, they didn't go down in shirtless, oiled up sweaty for us, but there was some intensity, there was some banter, there's chemistry between these two guys. It was giving me Top Gun, that's all.
The real island love story.
That's right.
Kris, I would say yes and no. I might have more to say on this later. I think the only difference for me is I do love the ping pong sequence. They're both so earnestly into that game, like small children. It kind of lacks the raw sexuality of Top Gun beach volleyball. So that's the only reason I didn't think it fully pinged for me. But you're not wrong. I mean, you've got these two, these two very handsome men. They're playing this game. They're in competition. So yeah, I love that. James, any other pop culture or literary shout outs for you?
The only other one that really comes to mind, again, from the bookcase of Stephen King, would be The Dead Zone, which I think has some of this precognition star-crossed lovers, doomed romance. Maybe not doomed. I mean, doomed. It's not doomed in Lost, but but it is certainly aping elements of that for dramatic effect.
All right. And I'm gonna say I'm mostly all done. I'll just say some of that stuff I was saying about Desmond having this need to achieve a certain level of worthiness as an English teacher. I was just recently in Great Gatsby mode, and there's certainly not a one-for-one parallel because, Jay Gatsby has dreamed up this absurd and very selfish vision of the future he wants, and he's using Daisy Buchanan just to fulfill his own fantasy in a selfish way. And I think that Desmond's love for Penny is a lot more pure, but it does get soiled by this sense that like he's not good enough. He has to be something else. So that just pinged for me a little bit as one of those big pop culture references. All right, folks, we're going to move on. Please feel free to smuggle in more references along the way if there are any that we missed.
It's time to get into some of the classic media lit stuff. Let's do some favorites. We'll start with James. James, what is your favorite quote from this episode?
Well, you actually said my favorite quote earlier, which is what Ruth says to him in their confrontation. However, I do have an alternate quote. One of my favorite moments in the history of the show is the campfire spooky story that Jin tells in Korean. And I do actually have the translation for that spooky story
You don't.
in front of me.
Wow.
So, if we want to edit in some spooky music. And the girl turned to the man who saved her and said, "Thank God. I was afraid you were the hook man." And as the man looked at the girl with a smile and said, "Don't worry, little girl. My hook is still in your father's head."
So good.
Just
Yeah,
one of
I
the
love
most
that.
delightful moments.
Amazing.
I love that call out. I had the same translation in front of me, so I'm really happy that we were on the same wavelength there. And just, shout out to Jin for selling the story in Korean, even if you didn't follow it live. You more or less get the sense it's some take on one of those slashery hook hand type stories. Love that. And just the love and admiration on his face as he delivers the story.
Yeah, so into it, so committed to it. John, what about you? What's your favorite quote from the episode?
Well, so first of all, I just want to say clearly that's the literary reference that we missed. It's the shared language of spooky storytelling around the campfire. That's an important thing to talk about. So I'm blessed to be left with all of the funny lines. So I'm just going to say one of them, and it is, if we don't play every 108 minutes, the island's going to explode. That is probably my favorite line from the episode.
Really good. Really, really good. What about you, Randy?
We've gone so deep and serious on this episode. Yeah, I just have a bunch of jokes. I actually do appreciate Charlie and the little superhero debate. Whatever would Superman do if he came up against a wall? Is a great one. And of course, Sawyer to Juliet and Jack. You two arguing over who's your favorite other is such a kind of stupid line for the fans, but Sawyer and Josh Holloway are just so good. It works on me every time.
Yeah, you can't write bad for Sawyer because he's too good. Josh Holloway's too good. For me, I also was a little jokey with it, I suppose, but I mean it. These are the moments that I live for. Desmond approaches Hurley. He's starting to build he's recruiting his heist gang. And Hurley looks at Desmond and he goes, "No, this is future crap, isn't it?" Perfect Hurley. Sets the tone for the whole episode. It's going to be future crap, isn't it?
Such a true hero.
Here you go. Well, we've done quotes. That brings us around then to the visuals. Let's do favorite shots. Randy, you haven't gone first all night, so we don't steal from you. What's your favorite shot of the episode?
All right. This is just before that pivotal moment for Desmond. It starts to rain. And Hurley says, "Thanks for the heads up about bringing an umbrella, dude." Just a little joke about those future telling abilities being kind of useless. However, at this point, Desmond then kind of looks up into the rain that's falling down upon his face. And I love this moment. It's a little bit of a cheat. I mean, the cinematography is nice. It's a beautiful shot. This whole show is beautiful on location. But the reason it pings for me is it makes me think of my favorite character, John Locke, back in season 1. when he predicts that the rain is about to fall successfully, and here Desmond is unable to do it. This is one of those moments where it's very possible that I'm thinking about it more than the writers were thinking about that connection. But there's some irony built in here, right? Because John Locke is operating kind of on the orders of the island. You know, at that point, we eventually learn he has seen and looked into the eye of the island, looked at the smoke monster. He's got this peace, this confidence in what he's doing. He feels in tune with his surroundings. He feels a sense of control and ownership. And, you know, the first time I watched that, I attributed this just mainly to John Locke's know-how and the studying he did for his walkabout and his ability to truly function as an outdoorsman. And, you know, I think he still deserves that credit. But I also just think about how much he got pushed in the wrong direction. And this feels like a loss for Desmond. But the fact that it kind of flips that moment on its head got me thinking about, you know, he's not beholden to the island. So we get this really different interaction with the weather. And I think as confused as Desmond is, you know, I think ultimately he reaches a better place and makes a few more correct decisions.
I love that. I love that you're always on the John Locke agenda.
For sure.
I think maybe you were seeing this more than the writers did. And I only say that because I noted this line about the umbrella, and I thought to myself how funny it would be if that was an ad lib, because I assume the challenges of like location shooting, it must have rained at times on the island when they didn't want it to, and they're on a schedule. And so I wonder what rain scenes were scripted as rain scenes versus were just incidentally filmed in the rain. So I love the idea that the actor slipped in the ad lib because of the context of the episode. James, what about you? Do you have a favorite sequence or shot from this episode?
I would say that my favorite like artistic choice that this episode makes is the cross-cutting at the end of the episode between the meet cute and getting Naomi down from the tree. It is not something that we see them do very often. It is usually if we are in flashback, we are in flashback, period. But I do think that the writers, or at least maybe Jack Bender feels this way, or no, it was Stephen Williams directed this episode. But maybe they feel they can get away with it more with Desmond, because Desmond does kind of exist in this place between the past and the present at any given time and the future. So we can feel more free to bounce around editorially when doing these moments with Desmond. And it does kind of feel like even the music cue, we do see something very similar, to much greater effect, applied in the Constant.
It's a great call out though, because this does kind of hint at how that Constant phone call will feel, right? These cross
exactly.
And, yeah, it's great call out. I love that artistic choice. I'm glad you highlighted it. Oh, it's such a letdown, so subversive because it's not a mute cute on the island. It's not. Anywho, Dr. John, how did you see this episode?
First, I just wanted to say I also really love that cross-cutting editing. And there are a few people who've made like chronological edits of Lost. And my understanding is that this sequence is one of the hardest to fit in because like, how do you only show the scenes of Penny and Desmond talking to each other when there is no B-roll? Like you just kind of have to like make sure you get shots from them from behind and maybe the same shot over. Like it's a really hard scene to edit in chronologically. And it is one of the few that stand out like that. So that's how I realized it was abnormal, or not abnormal, atypical for Lost. But yeah, so I think that since it hasn't been said, I'll just take the camping sequence. Lost does a lot of really beautiful shoots using sort of the day-night cycle on the island, and having Jin with the flashlight in his face in the dark. Like that's certainly the shot that stands out by far the most. Even though this is an episode with visions and all kinds of stuff, like it is that shot that's always stuck with me, and that whole sequence just in the dark while Desmond's like reading and stuff. Like it's a lovely sequence.
Glad you said it. It was on my list. I had a list of 4 because there are some delightful moments in this episode, and I think 3 out of the 4, maybe technically all 4, exist within the camping, because I could have talked about the Ghost story. I could have talked about the Flash Superman debate, which is a conversation we nerds have all lived in before, and it's so good. But the moment that I wanted to choose was the walk and whistle. They're doing the Breakfast Club whistle, and it's so charming. And they've done a great job in the writers' room of selecting the who's who of this little merry band that will go out on the camping trip together. They're some of our developing favorites. Jin is so delighted to be camping, and they're whistling away. Yeah, it's joy. I'm glad you all highlighted how this is sort of the end of that for Lost. This episode is a turning point for our Losties. And there's so much innocence in whistling while you walk together.
Beautiful. I've got to do a quick smuggle. The set design on Ruth's parents' house. I say Ruth's parents' house because of the very dated floral patterns, the couch and chair doilies, and also, I have no problem with Ruth or her parents owning a cross, but just this like very stark cross hanging at the foot of the staircase made me feel like I was in my Meme and Pepe's house. The bars on the staircase, everything is so closed off. It both tells us that Ruth isn't quite right, and it also turned into a theory over the course of this podcast. Was this monk identity partly about being worthy of Ruth, right? Because when he delivers that line about like this call to faith, he believes that like she's going to be so moved by that, and that she is not. And I don't mean that Desmond is being disingenuous completely with his mission to become a monk, but it does feel like it could be grounded in that.
I'm glad you went there, because if we're talking about Ruth's parents' house and the design, we can talk about the casting of Ruth's brother. He's only on screen for all of 30 seconds, but he looks exactly like the older brother who shows up at the monastery and knocks out the monk, crosses himself, and then leaves. He will then politely answer the door and let you in because his sister's okay with it. Yeah, he was just very well cast.
He
Beautiful
dated for 6 years, and the closest he ever came to a religious experience was Celtic winning the cup.
So good. You delivered that line better than she did with the accent, actually.
Yeah. Props to Ruth. Oh man. All right, folks. We love Lost. We love this episode. We love it even more than we did when we started talking about it. But I want to introduce a little segment called Hindsight is 2020. And the question is, if you could make one small edit to this episode of television, we're not trying to suggest that we know better than the creators or anything like that. Just if we could make a small change that would allow this episode to fit our vision a little bit better, what would it be? James, as the guest of honor, you've got to go first.
It's very dumb and minor, just as a preface. However, at the end of the episode, when Desmond is turning in his monk robes, and he puts the robes down on the desk, you can see for a moment there's a picture on the desk. And who's in this picture but Eloise Hawking and the monk? And it is one of the most poorly photoshopped images
Yes.
ever put to film.
So true.
I understand we don't have them on set on the same day. We're not going to hire Finola Flanagan just to stand for a picture with this actor that we've hired to be this monk. But I don't know. I think that there is perhaps a way that could have looked a little more like a real photo. And I'm going to smuggle in one other one, which is that in Desmond's original batch of visions that we see at the beginning of the episode, you can see Charlie holding out the the parachute to catch Naomi. So Charlie was destined to live, actually.
Whoa.
I like that it seems like we've all ascribed this to an editing problem rather than to like, oh, maybe like the Vision wanted him to save, but like, yeah, I think it was just an editing mistake.
We're not going to shoot it twice without Dominic and one with. We're not going to do it. We don't have time. We're losing daylight.
Yeah. We already did the throat
Yeah.
arrow effect. We don't have time.
And hey, they almost got away with it because people like me, whose suspension of disbelief is so very strong, will totally look past it and not notice.
At the time that it
Uh,
aired, the I was listening to the Lost podcast with Jay and Jack at the time, and they got so many calls of people pointing out Eloise Hawking in the photo that they in the episode played every single voicemail that they got of every fan who pointed that out.
That's perfect.
I bet you they wish they had done a better Photoshop when they realized how many folks really caught on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really bad. She's like looking off to the side in this weird profile. He looks almost like a mugshot. It's wild. Yeah.
It is a screen grab. It is a screen grab from Flashes Before Your Eyes that they used the lasso tool to cut her out.
Yep. Lasso. Kris, how about for you? What's your hindsight is 2020?
You know what? So my entryway into this was actually a little jokey and wound up being a little heavier than that because it's within the B plot. I like what they're doing there with the thruple quadrangle, these warring couples that we have now. But I wish it could have been achieved a little bit differently without like establishing the leeriness of Sawyer walking in on Kate. Like there's a lot that indicates the discomfort between them. And to James's point, I think you said so earlier, James, this episode really makes it clear they're not going to end up together. But the scene where she goes in ultimately to make love with Sawyer, she says, "Shut up and don't talk." And that was so redundant. It really like took me out for a second. And I was going to simply say that, like write that differently. But then I realized, oh, maybe it wasn't written that way. Maybe that. And I watched it again and I was like, oh, the actress is uncomfortable. And I bet you that isn't how that line was written, but this is the take that they went with. And there's chemistry between Kate and Sawyer, but I couldn't help knowing some of the background of the show and some of the context for the actress and the experience there, some of the issues with intimacy coordination and with the way women were treated, objectified. Yeah, I just felt I wish they had done this B plot in a way that just stayed kind of fun. Like it was really lovely when they played with the conversation between Kate and Jack around dinner. And Kate licks a spoon and gives it to Jack, and she thinks that they're flirting, but he's on his way to have dinner with Juliet. There was a lot of good stuff. I liked Jack and Sawyer on the other side of this now newly established kind of situation where they both have, you're with Kate? Oh, that's cool because I'm with Juliet. I think maybe that means we could be cool if we're both kind of okay. All that's working, but the intimacy stuff with Sawyer and Kate, for me, ultimately in this watch, didn't.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great call. That was on my list as well.
Like she's physically objectified. Like the camera really lingers. Like she's ultimately Sawyer's a character is objectified by Kate. Like so the show does kind of give it both ways, but the show never objectifies the actor physically in the same way as they do Kate. Like Josh Holloway isn't put shirtless there for her to climb atop of. Like his physical form isn't made like subject in the way that her physical form is made subject. So yeah.
I would just push back on that slightly, just because I do find that he's the only character. He's the only male character where this is the case. But I do think we do physically objectify Sawyer often.
Oh, we do. The show does. This episode I doesn't, just in contrast. Like there's never a point I noted. He's never shirtless, even when they're getting ready to make love. He's never like the camera doesn't ogle him in the same way that like that's how Kate is introduced to the episode.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
yeah.
But yes, we see plenty of shirtless Josh Holloway, plenty of great abs. There's plenty of like good stuff.
I'll never forget that he spent the entirety of the season 5 premiere shirtless.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would add always glistening. John, what do you have for a hindsight is 2020?
So those were both my choices. It was the editing of Charlie and the parachute, and it was the objectification of Kate. Maybe a couple of quick things I'll add to that. I think that Kris, you were sort of making this distinction between like the show being leery and Sawyer being leery. I don't know that I necessarily have a problem with the show writing a character who is leery, right? And I think we sort of agree with that. And Sawyer does do that in earlier episodes. I think actually my hindsight is 2020 about White Rabbit was Sawyer being creepy to Shannon. But like if you write that well, then it's clear that the character is being creepy. But here the show is so clearly being creepy because it's the
Yeah.
camera and it's the writing and the direction that's all pointing to this. And this is not the only time this happens to Kate, this kind of shot. And this is not the only time. I know that Lindelof is not the director. I understand that. But the exact same thing, almost the exact same shot, really, happens in the 2009 Star Trek, something he later apologized for. So there's
Mm-hmm.
sort of something happening here that I don't love, that is very of its time, or I hope is very of its time, that I certainly I think there are much better ways to film sensual shots and sex scenes and scenes where characters are clearly attracted to each other without it being sort of the camera pan up as someone pulls on their pants. Like it's just not
Yeah.
working for me. And I would love for it
Yeah.
to have done something different.
Yeah. No, great calls. Two quick ones for me. I'm gonna yes and the Eloise Hawking and Brother Campbell photo. Not only for the poor Photoshop, but also I love Eloise Hawking as a character, but I want this Desmond choice not to be belittled by the notion that perhaps Eloise was pulling the strings, because to suddenly make Desmond a monk in turn, I'll see you in another life, brother, into this, literal brothers in a monastery, was a bit of a stretch, and they're kind of actually pulling it off somehow. Like I believe it in the episode, and I like it. I think the Brother Campbell performance is great. But yeah, I don't think we need Eloise to show up there. I don't even think we need to know that the Widmores fund the monastery necessarily. I get why it's there, but I just wish it didn't feel so important. Or even if the photo were elsewhere and it was just like, oh, whatever, she visited the monastery for some reason. But it's like it's positioned on the desk as like a very personal, meaningful photo. So who's to say? And then my stupid one is love the set design of the ping pong table, but there is like this giant like ridge across a big portion of the playing surface on Jack's side of the table. And I just don't believe they could have possibly had a fair game of ping pong. Nor do I think Jack could go through the game without pointing that out and complaining, because that ping pong ball is going to be bouncing off in all sorts of wild directions every time it hits that ridge. So that was really irking me. Would I still try to play ping pong on it? Yes, but I don't know if you could really feel like it was a true fair competition.
Yeah, it's also set in the sand. I would be forever trying to make sure the table was level. I mean, is that it's a little sunken over there? It's not.
Sounds like a skill issue.
Just enough English on it, you can make it happen.
I am far from a ping pong pro, but I'm definitely not terrible at ping pong, right? And when I was first dating my now wife, I was at a family gathering for her extended family, and I was beating all the cousins at ping pong. And I'll leave the names out. But they're like, oh, well, now you've got to face off against our uncle, and he's going to wipe the floor with you. Basically, was the implied vibe. And I then played the hardest game of ping pong in my entire life, and I won. However, I really got away with it because I had been warming up for like a good hour and a half at this point. He had to come in cold, and this was not a regulation ping pong table. So it was very clear to me that I would have been decimated under any other circumstances, and I still feel a little guilty about it. So maybe that's why this table hit me so hard.
I'm now ready to write the scripted audio drama of the ping pong tournament. Wait.
Beautiful stuff. All right, folks. At the top of the episode, I gave a synopsis and I skipped over all of the love triangle, rectangle business that's going on in the background here. During our last segment, we covered some of the moments that didn't work for us so well. But now it's time to dig into all of the fun and games of the relationships in this episode of Lost in our Do You Ship It segment. Now, I've got a couple of special segments here today, and I've just got to start with rating the meet cute between Penny and Desmond. I don't need to ask you whether or not you ship it. Of course you do. Feel free to hit us with your hot take if you do not. But how would you rate this meet cute between Penny and Desmond amongst all of the meet cutes you have seen in literature and film over the years? Kris, I'm going to you first.
Randy, have you seen the film Up?
Sure have.
That film spends its first 10 minutes making us fall in love with a couple.
Mm-hmm.
Makes us
They sure
believe
do.
in their love. This episode achieves that very same level of deep, resonant connection between two humans with just a few little squinty smiles, the wrinkle of a nose. I think that this meet cute is up there with the very best of them. Their chemistry is through the roof. The banter is on point. It's innocent. It's not too much too soon, but it's also quite forward in certain ways. It's just a delight to be a part of as an audience member.
Beautiful. John?
Totally agree. Banter is fantastic. My one criticism, concern, bad feeling is that, of course, Brother Campbell, who is thanking Penelope for her father's donation, is introducing Desmond to Penny, putting him on his greater path than being a monk with his connection to Eloise Hawking. There's a bit of a sense of this is the laws of time. This is the manipulation of Eloise. Now, them following love and having chemistry, that's all them. So, like 99%, I'm in. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. But there's just like this element of like the external power. And that's all read mostly in retrospect, too. So, just watching it for the first time, I'm sure it would have been just as wonderful. But yeah, that's my one complaint.
Great take. James?
I don't know what you're talking about. I think Desmond and Ruth are endgame. They were the true OTP. We were robbed. But in all seriousness, I do think that this is like top tier TV romance. One of the best of all time, if not my personal favorite, that meet cute is in large part why I hold this episode in such high esteem. It is just mwah, it is perfect, it is beautiful, it is so good, in fact. I mean, their relationship is so strong, in fact, that it becomes a problem for the show once they are back together and we have reached the natural conclusion of their dramatic arc. But that's a problem for another day. In isolation, it is one of the best moments of the show and one of my favorite romantic moments in television.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and to everything you've all said. James, speaking of fan favorite relationships, a relationship that had not yet come to fruition in this episode is the eventual pairing of Sawyer and Juliet. They don't really get significant time together in this episode, but I was curious. Did you see anything that we could look back on and maybe read it as a little bit of foreshadowing for this eventual pairing?
So I was wondering that myself going into the episode. I would like to see if they had, because like this is like her maybe second episode back at camp, I think. This is like their first kind of moment like together after they had his whole standoff with Saeed and Juliet and One of Us. But I don't know at what point they realized they were going to do Sawyer and Juliet. But I don't think it was at this point. I don't think they knew yet. I think that by the time we get to Through the Looking Glass and she goes to join him on his adventure down to the beach, I think that we're thinking about it, but I don't think that they're committed to it. And then I do think we do a slight ramping up through seasons 4 and 5, going full send once we get to the season 5 premiere.
Beautiful stuff. John, how about you? Any foreshadowing, either intentional or incidental?
No, I don't think there's any in either case, although I'm here for hearing the arguments. I think that one of the things I don't love about My Shape of Choice is the rhombus, so the love rhombus. At this
Hmm.
point in the show, this is our first sort of like all four of them are just having fun on the island together rather than, all the dramatic stakes of Lost. And it is all centered around Kate. And my biggest problem with the love triangle has always been the way that it has been centered on Kate. I think Kate's a great character when she's outside of the love triangle, but the show says, get in the triangle, you're in there. And now they're like, look, there's a rhombus, it can open up. But Juliet has basically no perspectivity in this episode. She's given no agency. She's just sort of like off with Jack. It is all centered on Kate and her relationships to the other three. So I say zero foreshadowing of Sawyer and Juliet because it's all about Kate.
Kris?
I'm gonna fall in both camps here because I agree with John that I think in James too, that there's really no foreshadowing in this episode proper. There's no glances, looks, even as we did have moments in the camp, right? When James is imprisoned, there's moments of chemistry. I think that Juliet has great chemistry with Jack and Sawyer during those sequences previous in the season. But this episode, not really. However, because we know where we go, because we know what the end game is, I do think you could read it into it. And I like the idea of playing with the, like, oh, they always knew what they were doing. I think James is right. They didn't quite know yet that they were going to go here with Sawyer and Juliet, but they do. And so I'm imagining that I'm reading this book with the benefit of having read the seventh book where they are already together. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the author always knew. And right here, they were telling us, because I like when Sawyer just walks up between Jack and Juliet and says, sorry to interrupt. And he's sorry to interrupt because that's what he's doing. But he will later interrupt as they're separated by time, and Sawyer and Juliet will fall in love in the interstitial time period, and Jack will come back to the island to find that many years have passed in the past and that they are now a thing. So I was like, hey, look, they're foreshadowing already. He just said he's going to interrupt them, and he does. And then also, this is also a reach. Kate, at the end of the episode, when Sawyer gives her the mixtape, there's a glimmer of hope that she might like actually be charmed, but maybe there's something there. She calls him James. Just thank you, James. And that's what Juliet will ultimately call Sawyer, because she loves the man beneath the name, beneath the Sawyer, right? He's James to her. So again, I know they weren't really foreshadowing because they didn't really know, but if it was a really well-written novel series, perhaps these were indicators in this episode that that's where it was going.
No, beautiful stuff. I don't think there's anything intentional either. The one incidental thing that was running through my mind, this would not be the full healthy basis for Sawyer and Juliet, but Sawyer's had such a chip on his shoulder about Jack ever since the show started. He resents how quickly people trust Jack early on. One of his first missions is to break Jack down, break that automatic trust he has from people. And they've reached a much healthier place at this point in the series. But there's a part of Sawyer that wants to be Dr. Sawyer, to a certain extent. And he becomes that guy who gets the trust. And I don't know, maybe on a subconscious level, seeing Juliet and Jack together, someone he's maybe perceiving as a different sort of love interest. The one thing Juliet gets to do is she's a carpenter, right? She's building something. She's adding to the kitchen. She's making it a better place. So maybe a little deep cut sort of sense that this might be a pairing that reflects the person I want to be.
Yeah, and if I were gonna yes and that, I would also say that we are right at the beginning of Sawyer becoming that guy. You know, Sawyer, it was the ping pong tournament with Hurley, where where it's like we end that episode with Hurley being like, "You're the leader in this context. Jack is not here. Saeed is not here. Locke is doing his own thing. You are the guy right now. You're the one who we're gonna look to." And Sawyer rejects that because he doesn't see himself as that guy. But we see him now as kind of being this more amiable, like man of the people, like friend to all, like person. And there are two things that he will need to relieve himself of to really become that guy. And one of those things is Anthony Cooper, and the other is Kate. If we're being so honest, like he can't become the guy who is the leader, the best person of power in the show, debatably, with until he really kind of gains the self-respect to leave Kate behind.
No, I think that's perfect. So we've covered some of the all-time romances from Lost already, but I want to take a little bit of a closer look at what's happening within this episode. So in a more traditional do you ship it sense, I'm going to ask the group, do you ship it Jack and Juliet?
No. Don't like it.
No.
Yeah, I've got straight no's. I will simply add that it's a no for me because I feel zero chemistry. When we look over longingly at them having dinner, it just kind of looks like they're having study group or something. Like there's nothing romantic about it. Yeah, we're a united front here.
My dad taught me how to drink.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Peak romance, Jack.
Do you ship it Jack and Kate?
No.
They're both awful. They deserve each other.
That's fair. That's fair. Because I was going to say he's just too toxic still to be with anyone yet at this time. But
yeah,
I think that is totally fair.
Yeah, when they find each other in the sideways, it does feel like the right pairing. Not that they're always healthy, but I think they both experience some of their best moments together. Even if they weren't all best moments, they certainly were not. But all right,
I agree. And because I said I do quite loudly, I do think that even at this point, I would have been a shipper for them, and not in just they deserve each other, their terrible way. What I'll say is that the scene they have at the hutch is one of the more charming scenes they have together. I really felt the chemistry there. It was just a fun, cute scene, and I wish they had more of those and less of Jack telling her not to run into the forest. That would have been much better.
Preach, yeah.
Completely
agree. The spoon stuff is all crackling. I'm with you. All right. Do you ship it, Sawyer and Kate?
I mean, like, I do.
But you're mad about it?
Yeah, like leave my boy alone. He deserves better. He deserves Dr. Juliet Burke. But I can't deny the chemistry. Because I do think that, like, in the like Buffy Angel Spike dynamic, that we have with Kate, Jack, and Sawyer, I always prefer the Spike archetype in that dynamic because there is a sense of mutual respect that you don't get from the Angel archetype.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I mean, coincidence would have it that, I am a straight cis male, but when Sawyer calls Kate Freckles, I melt a little bit.
Who doesn't?
Good.
I mean,
very good.
What you gonna do? All right. Do you ship it, Jack and Sawyer?
Of course.
Yes. Twice on Sunday.
And this is them at their most charming with each other.
Yeah.
Like I think we all think of the like chopping wood, crying about dad scene, and that's a great one too. But like they're nice to each other in this episode. It's good.
Best two out of three. Well, all right.
Yeah.
Yes. More of this, please.
Yeah. Yeah, they're so vulnerable. And like, I kind of said this earlier, but just the movements are so quick and earnest and excited. Like they're really like these two kids playing, and it's really fun to see. All right. Do you ship it, Brother Campbell and Eloise Hawking cozying up in the worst Photoshop photo of all time?
I think we've already established that we don't like it as a plot device. We don't like it as a Photoshop, and I can't imagine we'd like it as a ship.
Okay, but what if, and hear me out, what if it's actually an on-purpose, in-universe bad Photoshop where Brother Campbell has an unrequited love or Eloise Hawking. I don't know if monks are allowed to be in relationships. I assume not. That seems like
That's
it's the
why
point
he
of
The
the
became a
episode.
ex-wife
monk.
of his beneficiary.
It's why he became a monk. You know,
Yes.
we couldn't have Eloise, and so no one.
So he photoshopped the photo so they could be together in it.
Or what if Eloise photoshopped it? Like, I will buy as many cases of wine as you want, but when Desmond's in your office, this guy has to be sitting on your desk just in case. So he knows that I'm involved. Love it.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. And finally, in a shout out to a podcast, The Storm, that we all loved. Do you ship it? Gin and camping.
Of course. There is no love more pure in the show, I don't think.
Yeah, where's the HGTV series of Jin taking us on adorable little like glamping adventures, just showing us some of the best tiny homes that Northwestern America has to offer?
Yeah, beautiful stuff. And he can make it through the whole scary stories to tell in the dark. I'm here for it. Kris, why don't you bring us home with our final quick fun game?
Yeah, we've shipped enough ships, I think. This is a fun one. If you could own one prop from the episode, what would it be and why? James, guest of honor, your episode. You get first pick.
I would like to sample a bottle of Mariah wine.
Mm-hmm.
Great answer. Great answer. I didn't think of that. I'm disappointed in myself and proud of you. Okay. Dr. John, what do you take home from this episode?
That was my answer. So instead, I guess I'll say a copy of Catch-22 because that would have been very helpful in preparation for this episode. Not that I speak
In Portuguese?
No, I'd have to take photos and Google Translate. It'd be a very complicated thing, but maybe just the book.
Be a labor of love is what it would be. Randy, what about you?
So I specifically want Charlie Pace's guitar with the Russo arrow embedded in the neck of the guitar that has nearly missed Charlie.
Great choice. You're thinking similarly to me because I want arrow itself, but I want the arrow post effect. I want the bloodied Ben in Charlie's arrow is what I want. It's either that or the satellite phone. It's just such a fun of the time. Like I remember like Jurassic Park was doing satellite phones. Like this was it's a big technology in television, satellite phones. So I wouldn't mind having that chunky paperweight too.
You know what? I changed my mind. I want the photo. I want the photo on my desk. That's what I want.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. If not for that crack, I would have said the ping pong table,
ladies and gentlemen.
Beautiful stuff. All right, folks. I want to thank our guest of honor, James, for being so game to come back and chat with us about an episode. I think we were able to dive deep and get a ton of brilliant insights. I also want to thank John Aslper, Dr. John, our resident Lost expert, for joining us once again. You're both just phenomenal guests.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure to talk about Lost. And after doing the stint on Chaos on the Set, where we're blowing through entire seasons in single episodes, it was really, really nice to do a deep dive into a single episode.
And I would add, please look for James on those lost episodes of Chaos on the Set, because they really just bring some incredible insight and fun and energy to those spoiler episodes. And yeah, I always love listening to that podcast, but James brought this extra level of energy. It's worth your time.
I am just sitting here tickled pink on the other side of another lost and lit experience. Dr. John, thank you for being the steadying presence in this media lit format. It's so wonderful to have you. And James, thank you for bringing this episode as well as your tremendous insights. This was a blast. I love to keep this conversation going, and that is up to you podlings listening out there. This little thing we do, Media Lit, is something that Randy and I love, and we've begun to hear from some of you about how you're loving it, or perhaps not all the time as well. We want more of that. We want other podlings to come and join the family. So please like and subscribe to this show wherever you get your podcasts. Click the little download button to download us every week and give us the 5 stars. That's going to mean that other story-minded folks will find this podcast and join the conversation. Please and thank you. You can email us at media.slash.lit@gmail.com. That's where you can assign us some homework. You can critique our terrible takes on the things we've talked about, or you can double down on some of your favorite segments and share your favorite quotes. Come and join the conversation. We're on Instagram at media.lit.pod. Follow us there. We actually got a review recently that I'm excited to share. Randy, can I go ahead and read this out to the podlings?
Yeah, this is a Hall of Famer. Go right ahead.
This is a Hall of Famer. Vomit Garden chimed in to tell us that this is media and this is lit. 3 flame emojis, ladies and gentlemen. 3 flame emojis. So that's the kind of review standard we're experiencing thus far, and we would love to hear from more of you. Please and thank you.
Thank you so much, Kris, for plugging the podcast. You can also find us on Twitter at MediaLitPod, on Instagram at media.lit.pod. Before we go, James, do you have any other projects, work, or social media presence you want to plug?
Oh, sure. You can follow me at Ninja Surprise on Twitter, and you can follow me at Prince Squeak on Letterboxd and Instagram.
Perfect. Dr. John Aspler, where can folks follow you and or see your work?
So I'm mostly on Twitter and Instagram at Lost Cadence, or you can find my Substack, Serially Engaged. As always, just really happy to be here, really happy to talk about Lost. Thank you for having me again.
Our pleasure. Kris, when you're not on Media Lit, where can the folks find you?
I am an actor and a voice actor. I'm a husband and a father. You can find me doing all of those things on Instagram. I'm at Kris_Ingersoll. That's Kris spelled like Kringle. And I'm also the co-host of a podcast called Batman by the Numbers, a part of the Pop Break feed. You can find us there talking about Batman, his villains, and anything even remotely connected to the Dark Knight's world.
Beautiful stuff. And I'm your host, Randy Elaine. In addition to Media Lit, you can find me at the Pop Break podcast feed as well, where I am taking part in Pod of Doom, a Black Sabbath appreciation podcast. You can also find me doing some entertainment writing over there. If you want to go searching for Bluey or The Owl House or Fargo Season 5, you can find me. I'm playing Desmond Hume right now because this episode is coming out quite a bit later than we are recording it, but I believe I will either be in the process of covering Severance Season 2 episode by episode, or I will be starting in the very near future. So please be on the lookout for that. All right. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.